Right, rook and pawn versus bishop and pawn. It's impossible to go through all the different permutations of where those pawns could be in rook and pawn versus bishop and pawn, but we can go through some of the most likely scenarios. So we've got locked on the same file where it's the same colour as the bishop, where the defending side's pawn is locked, and then the opposite. So locked on the same file, but the opposite colour for the defending side's pawn being an opposite colour square to the colour of their bishop. And one of those two situations is very favourable for the defending side. The other one is basically lost. Well, we could also see where the pawns haven't quite locked yet. Ignore that, it's about to get lost in a minute anyway. And then the same again in this situation. We could have the pawns on adjacent files. This is a game from 1952 where Botvinnik with the black pieces is about to play this extremely well and convert what is a winning position. We then get into the world of fortresses. This is actually fortress F12 at the end of the 100 Endgames book. Jesus de la Villa has also plonked in loads of fortresses. So as well as 100 Endgames you must know, are lots of fortresses that you might like to know as well. Hence on the video in the bottom left I've put a picture of, I think that's called Bishop Fortress or Bishop Castle. So fortress is quite a common theme. And I'll finish this video with a fortress that's not a fortress, but certainly it's not one I've been able to break down when I've practiced this against Stockfish. Just to give you an idea of how hard this one is, this is actually fortress F8 in the 100 Endgames book at the end. It's until 1993 it was believed to just be a draw, and then some guy called Elkies back in 1993 proved that it was indeed a win for white. I've sort of understood the winning procedure. I know roughly what's going on, but I've not been able to win this once in my attempts against Stockfish. It's sort of just driven me mad. More practice needed. Maybe I'll just leave it up to you. It's certainly not going to get solved in this video. But let's kick off with where the pawns are locked. Like I say, this is not the favourable situation for the defending side. And rather than go through the text moves, this is a game from 1942, this was a game from 1922, rather than go through the text in the Dvoretsky Endgame manual, I'm just going to play them against Stockfish straight away, just to show that they are pretty straightforward. Which is what I think we should all do, by the way. If if a position's won, just play it against an engine and win it. And if it's a draw, play it against an engine and draw it. And once I've gone through the two locked pawn situations, then we'll get on to something a bit more interesting where it's not quite locked. This is actually a position from 1966 involving Dvoretsky himself, who's about to play this pretty well with the black pieces. He eventually messes it up and is very critical of his final blunder. But it looked to me like he played it very, very well indeed. So yeah, white to play. I'm playing this against Stockfish. It's a very easy winning plan. I'm just going to come and sack the exchange on f4. There's a problem with that though. Rook takes f4, bishop takes f4, king takes f4. If black can then play king f6, it's a draw. Now, if these locked pawns were shoved up a couple of ranks, we don't even have to think about that. We just sack the exchange on f6. It's done. But because they're not, we do have to think about that. If king takes f4 at the end of those exchanges is followed up by king f6, then it's a draw. Okay, so we've got that prerequisite knowledge of king and pawn versus king that's absolutely essential to be able to convert this one. Not massively difficult prerequisite knowledge, but like all this endgame work, there's like a layering of knowledge that's required. You have to understand the basic ones before you can get on with the more difficult ones. Even in that rook and bishop situation, and we had rook and pawn versus bishop, we had to understand how the rook and the bishop just alone, how that was drawn in the right corner and not in the wrong corner and so on before you could worry about the extra pawn. Anyway, in the Dvoretsky Endgame manual, the first move is rook f7 check, which is fine. It just sort of forces the black king off the f file, which is a good idea. The way I look at this position, after much thought about it, is that we could think of the direction of travel being this way, so that if we can line up our king opposite the black king, you know, there's a checkmate being threatened here. But if we sort of stop thinking about the direction of travel being that way, because at some point we're going to have to come back, bring the rook back and take on f4. If we're thinking of the direction of travel being that way, there's not really a way to stop the black king landing on f6. But we can use checkmate threats with the direction of travel being that way to force the black king off the back rank. So the direction of travel then becomes this way or this way. And what I'm looking to do here is either force the black king onto the h file so that it's cut off by a rook that could then come down to g4 and take on f4, or onto the d file where I can use a rook to then come down and take on f4. And the black king's just sort of cut off because the, you know, over there or over there. That's the plan. Now if I move my rook on the 7th rank, black's bishop is defending this f-pawn at the moment and has to stay defending that f-pawn. I'm just looking to start nicking some of these squares that the bishop can use. So rook c7 seems like a perfectly reasonable move to control this square here by the bishop. If the king had moved there, that would be checkmate. And if it had gone the other way, well then I would probably have to come and cut the king off and proceed there. Now, because I'm controlling c3, that bishop check isn't possible. So now I can force the black king off the f-file. Checkmate's being threatened. Black king has to come off the f-file, and now it's coming off the 8th rank. Not sure I care too much where my rook goes here. I could probably go to g8. I'm just going to put it on a8 and then bring my king to f7. I've been checked to f7 anyway, and there's nothing that black could do there to stop me coming to e8. The black king's cut off onto the d file. Rook e4. I can pre-move these because they're all on white squares, and I can even pre-move rook takes f4. Because the black king was cut off on the d file, there was no way that it could finish these exchanges. Oh, I didn't take the rook. With king f6. I'm not going to carry that on. It's a very easy win from there. Now in this position, I'm playing it as white, but this time I've got to draw it. And the way to do it is to keep attacking that g-pawn. Just like if you've got king and knight versus king and rook. You know, sorry, knight and pawn versus rook and pawn. The only way you can really draw that is if you can put your knight in a situation, in a place where it attacks the enemy's pawn, but also controls key invasion squares for the enemy king. And that's what we're doing here. We're attacking g5 and we're controlling, those two look pretty important, possibly even this one you could consider as an invasion square. And this means that black's got to tie down either their king or their rook to defending g5. Once the g-pawn's hanging, we'll take it. We've just got to be a bit careful then to get into a drawn version of rook versus bishop. So we ought to think about, I mean, even at this stage, we should think about where's the wrong corner is here, isn't it? Okay, so we're already sort of towards the right corner anyway, so that bit's probably going to be okay. You'd hope, you'd think. Fingers crossed. Anyway, let's just keep the bishop on this diagonal. In my practice against Stockfish so far on this one, it's just played some very strange moves like there straight away. It doesn't really make much of an attempt to win this. It's very unclear. I mean, it just doesn't seem to have a plan at any stage. All we've seen so far is king back and forth and moves the rook. A human being wouldn't do this. A human being would think, okay, I'll come back and defend the g-pawn with my king, so bring my king back to defend the g-pawn, and then I'll move the rook and see if I can invade with my rook. That's what we'd do, isn't it? I mean, it's the fact that that doesn't get anywhere that Stockfish has worked out, and they're just playing any old nonsense. So sorry, this could get a bit boring unless Stockfish tries to do something imaginative. You can see that no progress is being made here the entire time this rook is tied down to defending the g-pawn. And in 15 moves, Stockfish has done nothing to change that situation. We'd like to see the king come back to g6 and then the rook employed to do something. One other possibility is, and we could definitely get the king to g6. This is what happens in the text in the Dvoretsky manual. Then defend the pawn from the side with the rook, and the player with the black pieces. This was actually a game from 1922. They manoeuvre their rook around the back, their king, sorry, around the back of the rook, try to get it in, and that doesn't get them anywhere either. There is one final drawing resource that the player with the white pieces should be aware of. Something to think about here. It doesn't look like we're going to need to use it because Stockfish is doing nothing. But yeah, just as a little something to think about. Imagine the black king sort of gets round the back and we're sort of really in zugzwang. Is there anything we could do there? Is there like a change of plan drawing idea that we should have on our radar? Worth thinking about. I'll just play a few more moves before I give you what I believe to be the answer. Well, that's very slightly different, but not a big problem. We just shift the king. The g-pawn's still undefended. Got to go back with the rook. King there, let's shove in a check. We're going to see king g6. It'd be nice to see king g6 just to, nope. Just to see something different. Yeah, although we should practice this stuff against engines, I mean, sometimes you feel like you should also practice it against human beings because they'll do different things. Things that the engine hasn't thought to do because they're just draws. But they're only draws if you play perfect moves next. So I feel like Stockfish is just giving us too much credit that we're going to play this perfectly in a minute. So the drawing resource, which isn't going to become an issue here, is if the black king ends up too far down here, you have to calculate it out, but we can just sack the bishop. Rook takes, king comes into f4. Calculate it out, but it's if it's a drawn version of rook versus pawn, it's definitely worth going into, basically. Oh, I've just realised, sorry, his g-pawn's hanging. Right, can we take that? Can we take that g-pawn? Is there a reason not to take that g-pawn? I can't see one. I think we're taking that g-pawn. You just got to be careful with these things. Let's get the bishop out of there. And we'll get our king into the right corner. And yeah. Okay, so this is now just a drawn version of rook versus bishop, which I'm not going to play out again. So we'll call that a day there. So next, this is a game from 1966 where Dvoretsky himself was the player with the black pieces. We don't want to play this because we know, I mean, ignore that pawn. It's going to get lost in a minute anyway. But this is a very, very bad idea. It's a losing move because you've then got your pawn locked on the same colour as the bishop, where we know that eventually it's going to get lost. I mean, the black king's sort of in a bit of a mating net as well if it's not careful. But unfortunately, white's threatening this check here, followed by what will be a checkmate there. So black has to just give up the pawn in this situation and play bishop h3. But what I've sort of noticed a lot with this, we saw it in rook and pawn versus bishop, but now we're seeing it in rook and pawn versus bishop and pawn, is it's almost worth identifying, sorry, it's always worth identifying a diagonal that's going to be very useful, and it's this diagonal here. Give up the a-pawn, it's gone, and just keep your bishop on that diagonal. And that's exactly what black did. Just refused to be bullied off that diagonal. When I go through the moves, the engine's just saying drawn, 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 drawn all the way. And yeah, Dvoretsky just did not take his bishop off that diagonal. And this was kind of a cool bit to it. The only way that white could make progress to win this g5 pawn was to bring the king to f6 and then attack with the rook. Okay, it had to be him, and the pawn was in the way of attacking this way, or it could have attacked from behind, but it's the same problem. As soon as the rooks attacked the g-pawn, it could only be done when the king was up here on f6. So then black just comes here. Bishop gets in the way of the rook's defence of g3, and the g-pawn's gone. King came into e3, king h3, king f4, and there are two drawing moves here. But sadly, after playing it all so well, Dvoretsky didn't find either of them and now blundered in this position here. What would you play here? Rook versus bishop. We, I suppose, want to identify the wrong corner and the right corner. I guess we're a little bit close to the wrong corner over here, which is a problem. But yeah, black needed to stay on this diagonal, so both bishop e2 and bishop d1 would have been fine. Instead, he went back on this diagonal, and now this was a problem. The reason it was a problem is he got straight away shoved into the wrong corner. Had to maintain control of the f3 square, because rook g3 check, the king can't come to h4 because that forks checkmate and the bishop. So the bishop's going to get lost there. So the king had to go to h2, but now the black king is in the wrong corner. I'm not sure why white played that. King f2 should just be played here, okay? Because the white king could jump across to the f2 square, could go through the f3 square, and if we were controlling f3 with the bishop on this diagonal, that wouldn't have been a problem. So bishop a4 played. Rook g2. I don't get that move. It looks a bit daft to me. Oh, okay. It's just, yeah, so the black king tries to escape. Rook g3 check. Can't go to h4 because that wins the bishop. It's almost teasing that, isn't it? King h2. Now he plays king f2. Okay. And yeah, the black king's in the wrong corner. The only thing that black could do is try and hide in the shadow of the king. Covered that in rook versus bishop. But the rook will just come and bust the black bishop out of the shadows, and black actually resigned there. Didn't even bother getting okay, because it's gone to the third rank. It can't. Black now can't get the king out, so it probably needs to go over here somewhere. But we've seen all of that before, and it's just a win. So yeah, real shame that, because he'd done everything so perfectly. Dropped the a-pawn, just kept on this diagonal. White got absolutely nowhere. The only way that white could make progress was to get their king to f6 and line up, winning the g-pawn. But as soon as that was done, this beautiful little maneuver, and the white's g-pawn's gone as well. So same sort of pawn configuration. This was actually an exercise in the Dvoretsky manual. Pause the video if you like and try and work out what's the diagonal that you want to get your bishop onto. Okay, what should black play here? So this was actually a game from 1973. Well done if you worked out that this is the diagonal that we need to get the black bishop controlling. Black has two drawing moves here. One of them wasn't played in the game. I mean, if that's the diagonal that needs controlling, then it's fairly clear that bishop g3 straight away is a good move. Bishop h4 is also fine. I guess that's because there's no way to stop the bishop sort of somehow making its way back onto the important diagonal. There's too many sort of jumping possibilities to get back onto that really important controlling diagonal, particularly the f4 square that needs controlling. It's going to be a similar sort of drawing maneuver to the previous game, where as the player with the black pieces, there's not really much we can do to stop the f-pawn from dropping. But what we can do is make sure that the white king has to land on e6 in order to be able to do it, and that's the bit where we can make a run for it across the f4 square, and we're going to jam a bishop in on f4 to block the rook from defending on f3. So pretty similar to the way Dvoretsky did it in that 1966 game in the last position. So one move that is fairly obviously bad, hopefully, from just the first half of this video, is bishop e3. So again, we get the sort of the layering of knowledge. If you've got this in a game, you might not understand what's going on in this position. But if you knew that with the locked pawns, that's just gone, because white will be able to engineer an exchange sack on f4 in such a way that you can't finish off with king f6. We've seen that done. That's just lost. So don't play bishop e3. The player with the black pieces in the game played bishop g1. This was also lost, and it was all because they couldn't get back onto this diagonal. So white played rook e2 check, already controlling this h2 square that black would like to get to. King f6, and the king's in. King d5. The bishop came back, desperately trying to get onto that diagonal. Rook e8 to control the b8 square. Back to f2, but now white played f4. And there's nothing. I mean, black just resigned there because there's nothing that can be done. Okay, bishop g3, rook f8 check. If the king attacks the rook, we take the f-pawn. And if the king doesn't attack the rook and tries to hold on to the f-pawn, we follow it in whilst also defending our f4 pawn. So the player with the black pieces resign there. So in the original position, bishop h4 is okay, like I said, but bishop g3, just control that diagonal. If white wants to try and make progress, they are going to have to come and try and get the f-pawn. So we might see rook e2 check, all similar sorts of moves, but this time we're controlling the f4 square. We've got our bishop on this diagonal. Hits the bishop, king into d5, stay on the diagonal, hit the bishop again. Now this is difficult. Where are you going to put the bishop? You want to keep it on this diagonal. It's being hit. Okay. That's a fairly obviously bad square. Rook f8 check. The white king can just come in and take everything. That's a winning king and pawn versus king. You don't want to be shoving it in front of the pawn. That's also a very bad idea. Rook f8 check. So they're bad candidate moves. d6 is obviously d6 and g3 are obviously ridiculous candidate moves. So it's either c7 or h2. Which one? So c7's a losing move. It's complicated, but it's a losing move. Why? Rook f8 check. Black might think, fine, this is my plan. King g5, king e6. I'm coming across. You can have the f-pawn. I'm coming across to e3, and I would jam a bishop in on f4. And indeed, it's still complicated, but that is a draw. Rook takes f5 check. King e3. What does white do? Black's going to jam a bishop in on f4. Well, they could try this. Rook c5. This time there are two drawing moves, but bishop h2 is one of them, just as an example line. The f-pawn's under attack, and white has, well, other than going back to f5 and allowing the jam, rook c3 check, king back to f4. White might try and bring their king in, but we're going to do the jam on e3 instead. So what was so bad about bishop c7? Well, the point is that white doesn't take the f-pawn. White attacks the bishop, and if the black bishop insists on staying on that diagonal, it's a very important diagonal because we're getting ready to jam on f4, then it has no squares. How about that for a sort of a picturesque end to the game? I mean, bishop e5 obviously got rook b4 check, but yeah, the black bishop is lost. So to not lose their bishop, black would have to step off the diagonal, but now they're not controlling the f4 square. So just check, king to e3, drop the rook back, and we're controlling the c7 square, which means there's no way that black can cover f4, and white could pretty much pre-move it. I say pretty much pre-move it because you could get tricked, couldn't you? So, but other than that silly move, you can pretty much pre-move f4. So, I mean, seeing all of that back here, tough call, I reckon. But I guess there's a different principle that might allow you to just to choose h2 over c7, which is just the, we've seen in all the bishop versus rook stuff, get your bishop out of there. Just let it do its important job from a distance. So yeah, bishop h2 would be a drawing move. Let's just see it. Rook f8 check, king g5, the f-pawn's gone. Fine, I know my f-pawn's gone, but I will be jamming a bishop on f4. So that original position, really, really tough to draw that. But it is possible if we can get control of that diagonal. And in fact, in the previous position from, this was the starting position from that 1966 game where Dvoretsky was black. It's pretty much the same setup. That was the important diagonal. And Dvoretsky played it perfectly until we saw the jamming and the winning of the g3 pawn, and then put his bishop on the wrong square and got trapped in the wrong corner, which I guess is a bit of a shame. Right, next, this is a game from 1952. It is black to play. Botvinnik had the black pieces, so you're about to see, unsurprisingly, some very good moves, a very well executed endgame. I mean, the engine's saying minus 96, which I don't even know what that means, but certainly I've had positions that are minus 2 that I found a lot easier to win than I think I would this with the black pieces. I could see myself going around in circles, getting nowhere against Stockfish on this one. So this will be one of those sort of apparent fortresses that isn't a fortress, but well, again, just jumping ahead. That's false fortress f8 in the 100 Endgames book. I can't break it, so I'm not saying that I'm a great player, but I mean, the engine's saying that's plus 99. Just like it's meaningless to me. I couldn't win that. Probably could against a human, but I couldn't do it against Stockfish. Anyway, back to this one. What's going on? Well, an obvious candidate move is rook c3 check. Just get the king out of there. So king e4, rook into g3. The problem is that white plays bishop h3. And black kind of wants to say pass. But you're not allowed to say pass in chess. I mean, the rook could move, bishop gets off the diagonal, rook could move again, bishop stays on that diagonal. As long as the bishop is ready to answer rook g3 with bishop h3, then this is sort of a bit of a reciprocal zugzwang situation. So appreciating that white wanted to keep their bishop on this diagonal, Botvinnik played rook c7. So that now, I mean, where can the bishop go? These two squares are being controlled. f5's covered directly by the king. g4's covered indirectly, but pretty much directly. Where can the white bishop go? Well, it could only go to h3. But then we see the same position, and now we're back to that exact same position, but this time black has managed to say pass. What's so good about this pass? Well, if king e5, rook e3 check, king d4, and we're in on the dark squares, we are going to win that very easily by taking the g2 pawn in a minute with our rook. We're going to sack the exchange on g2, and the h pawn is going to march on. All right. I won't move my bishop then, because bishop h3 is lost. I will move my king. King e4. Problem with this is rook e7, and our black king's coming into f4 again. White's like, no, it's not. And we drop the rook back. Yes, it is. King d6, king f4, black's in. Okay. In the game, I mean, this is gone after that rook c7, I guess double exclamation mark. In the game, white played g4. Rook c3 check, king g2, h3 check, king h2, king h4. White tried g5 here. Here's a question for you. Can you take that pawn? Can black take that pawn? Because the white bishop, so the white king is trapped in the wrong corner. It's the same colour. square as their bishop. So you'd have rook versus bishop. You know, can we do this? What do you reckon? I mean, obviously we'd have to analyse it back there. The answer is no. There is no way to trap that king in the wrong corner. It looks difficult for white to defend, but it is a draw. Just in case anyone was interested. So yeah, you can't take them. You don't need to take the pawn. There are black's fifth worst move here is checkmate in 21 apparently, but the move Botvinnik played is checkmate in 5, and the player with the white pieces didn't hang around to see the other 4 moves after rook c2 check. Right, next, this position here is a fortress. It is fortress f12 in the back of this 100 Endgames book. I'll go through all the various ways in which it's a fortress. I'll play it against Stockfish, but I've already tried that. I've already practiced it once, and Stockfish just goes straight down the textbook line, and it is a draw. There's also a prerequisite knowledge required to understand the final position and why it's a draw, and it's called the Del Rio position. I covered it in Rook and Bishop's pawn versus Bishop. Not doing it again, but once I get to the Del Rio position, I'm declaring it as a draw. So what does white play here? White has only one drawing move. You could pause the video and try and find it if you wanted to. Not a drawing move is king g1. If king g1, we'd see rook a1 check. King has to go out to h2. Black plays a waiting move. Bishop d4. Then rook c2. So f3 being threatened. King into g1. Sorry, king g1 and king into g3. So we're controlling the f2 square. It's over. That's completely over. So not king g1. King g1 needs to trouble straight away. If bishop e1, f3 straight away. Okay. White might think to play g3, rook a1, king to f2, and then takes, and it's a winning king and pawn ending. Okay. So how is it a draw? Well, white needs to maintain control over, basically maintain control of g3 with their bishop, and we're just going to wait around with the king, so we can actually play king e1. If black does nothing with rook b2, we can go back to f1. If black tries f3, then we can go to g1 anyway. Rook b1 check, king h2. We're in the right corner already, with this corner square being a different colour to our bishop. The pawns are getting swapped. That is going to be a draw. I mean, I guess we could see a repeat of rook b2 and king back to g1. But yeah, that's just a draw. So not rook b2. So after this sort of waiting move, king e1, rook a1 check, king e2. Now black plays a waiting move, rook c1. The problem with rook h1 straight away is that we've got time now to play bishop e1, rook h2, king back to f1, f3, takes, king takes f3, king g1, rook g2 check, king h1, and we're in the right corner. So there's no way that black can win that. We're back to rook versus bishop. So black plays a waiting move, and this waiting move looks quite clever in that our king gets forced even further away. This is still a draw, but the king gets forced even further away. So bishop e1, if that gets played, this is a loss now. Rook c2 check, king f1, f3, and it's gone in a similar way to before. So not king e1, instead king d2, and this looks really bad because we're sort of really a long way away now from the g2 pawn and being able to defend it. Rook h2, king e2, rook to h2, king f1, f pawn gets pushed. It looks like big trouble now for white. But check this move out. King g1, just attack the black rook. Can't be defended. It has to get out of there, and then our king's in the right corner. We could probably just swap pawns there in that situation. Or rook takes g2 check, king back to f1. It is the drawn Del Rio position. Okay, so I'll try this this fortress f12 against Stockfish. I'll play it from the start. I've got a feeling it is just going to do the textbook line, and there's not going to be anything interesting about this. King, oh, straight away we have a different move to what happened last time I practiced this. So king to e1, he's gone rook a5. Now, can I just play king to f1? I don't know. I'm going to try. Now king to e2. Oh, we are just transposing, I think. I think we go rook h1 now. Yeah, and we're just going to see the textbook line. He's going to play f3 straight away. He's going to try something else. No, play f3 straight away. King g1. Okay, so yeah, that is the drawn Del Rio position straight away. And yeah, let's not bother going through that again. So yeah, sorry about that. I did think that Stockfish might do that. Right, finally, I said I'd finish by talking about this fortress f8 from the 100 Endgames book, which is a false fortress, and it's not a fortress. So some guy called Elkies proved back in 1993 that this is a win for white, after many years of all the top grandmasters believing this position was drawn, which again gives you an idea of how hard it is. I'm not going to attempt to go through it. I mean, this is the position. Set it up if you like. In fact, I recommend you do this, set this up against an engine and see if you can win it, because for the life of me, I've not been able to do it. The text in the Dvoretsky manual, it sort of goes through and explains it all, but there's just too many variations, and I've tried very, very hard, haven't been able to keep track of all of them, and there's kind of too many offshoots of the variations. I'll go through the winning plan that white needs to try and do here, and I'll explain sort of the problems I've encountered on it. But what we're going to do as white, apparently what we should be trying to do, is put the rook on b5 or d5, depending on where the black bishop is, and drop the king back to g4. Now from the g4 square, the white king is going to have two options. It's either going to make its way to h6, or it's going to make its way to f6, depending on where the black bishop is. So the idea is that we're going to use the rook to take away the squares of the bishop. Because, I mean, if the king came to h6 straight away, bishop f8 check, and if the king lands on f6, then there are all sorts of places around the board where the black bishop could do a check. And you can see that the white rook is not able to cover all of those squares at once, which makes this extremely difficult. But that's what you've got to try and do. You've got to try and use the white rook to take away squares from the bishop, force it to slightly less favourable diagonals, and then make your king move based on that. But there's even some of the variations where you force the black bishop to a slightly less favourable diagonal, go to h5, it goes somewhere else, you move your rook denying it access to a different square, and only then do you then come back to f5. And I'm sorry, but it's just too hard for me. If I had this in a game, I would just try and take squares away from this bishop as much as I could, and I'd probably just mess about a bit until hopefully I could one day land my king on f6 or h6. If the white king arrives on f6 or h6 without getting checked, it's a win for white. Pretty much, actually. I'll just say one more thing on that, is that because I've got this far against the engine, this is the sort of an example line. There you go. We're taking away squares from the bishop from checking us on f6. And you think, aha, it's done. Bishop d4, king into f6, we've done it. But then the black bishop comes back to a5. And it's controlling that we want to get the rook to d8 to do a check. But we can't let go, well, it's covered at the moment, so we need to get our rook to the back rank to check, but we can't let go control of the c3 square, otherwise that's going to force our king off f6. So you go rook b3, bishop d8 check, the king's got to retreat, and then the bishop goes back to a5, and you think you're going around in circles. And this is one of the situations where you now come back the other way. It's really, really, really hard. So I'm basically not going to do anything on it, I'm afraid, other than what I've explained. But this position is a win for white. Set it up against Stockfish if you like, and give it a go. And yeah, good luck. That's all I can say. But hopefully, lots of helpful stuff in that video, especially with the pawns being locked, and then how that was useful in these subsequent positions. These games here of like, well, for example, here. We know straight away that that's no good because that's a lost position, etc., etc. So anyway, I mean, I've been through a lot of those positions. I do feel as if I've got more knowledge of what's going on in them, and I can do a better job of those sorts of positions than I would have done before. That is, if they come up in my games in the near future. They'll probably come up in my games in 6 months when I've forgotten all of this. But hey ho. Yeah, call it a day there.